For those of you who don't know our next guest, this is Matthew Berry. Matthew is the preeminent sports betting, daily fantasy sports analyst in the space. He is NBC Sports' senior fantasy and sports betting analyst. He's also the founder of Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Matthew, welcome to the stage.
Thanks for having me. Great to see everyone.
So why don't you just take us all the way back? How do you fantasy sports? When does this come on your radar? Fantasy sports is relatively new, right? It was rotisserie through.
Yeah, I was 14 years old and a kid that loved to read and read a bunch of books. And so in 1980, again, aging myself here, but when the original book, Rotisserie League Baseball, when that book came out, I read it, I devoured it, and the founding fathers, the people that invented fantasy baseball. And so it was December of '83 when it came out. And so in spring of '84, there was College Station, Texas, where I was growing up. Randomly, there was a league that was forming. I heard these guys talking. I'm like, are you guys talking about Rotisserie League Baseball? And they're like, you've heard of it? I'm like, yeah, I just read the book. You've heard of it? And they're like, yeah, we're forming a league. We need a 10th. And I'm like, I'm in. And so later in my career, I was very lucky. I got to meet and actually sit at a fantasy baseball draft table, an auction table with Daniel Okrent, who is widely considered the founding father. And he told me that, he remembered we were one of the first 50 leagues, one of the first 50 fantasy baseball leagues in the country, because they had this stat service where they would fax you their this is pre-internet. You would get your standings faxed to you. So ever since I was 14 years old, that's a long time ago, I've been playing fantasy sports and obsessed with it.
And when does the football piece, because that's baseball?
College, yeah. So in college, I was playing fantasy baseball, and then in college, I went to Syracuse University, go 'Cuse, and so I joined my very first fantasy football league in college. That league is still together to this day. And it's with a bunch of buddies of mine from college.
And so what happens when you get out of college? Because you had a couple exits early on before you got into this.
Yeah, so a couple of things, right? So I've had a very weird career. So I get out of college and I have a bunch of different side jobs, which will take us up on a whole path. It's actually talking outside to someone. My first job out of college, I was George Carlin's assistant. I swear to God, it's just, when I tell you I've had a weird career, I've had a weird career. But I moved out to Hollywood to be a screenwriter, to write for TV and movies. And so I got this job working for George, and then ultimately I ended up becoming a writer on a bunch of sitcoms, and I wrote some movies as well.
Well, one of my favorite sitcoms.
Married with Children, I assume? Yeah. So, and what happened is Roto World, which is now owned by NBC Sports, but at the time was not. This is 1999. It is this is dial-up. You've got mail, AOL, CompuServe. I'm again dating myself. But Roto World was advertising for writers, and so I wrote them a note and I said, listen, I play in a ton of leagues. I'm a professional writer living out here in Hollywood, but fantasy sports is my passion. I would love to write a column on the side, just as a fun gig. I think that'd be really fun. And they wrote me back the next day and they said, we looked you up on IMDb. Married with Children is our favorite show of all time. You're hired. So because I wrote mean wife jokes for Al Bundy, I got the chance to write a free column for a low-trafficked internet site in 1999. I think I'm a pretty good writer. The column quickly developed a following. In 2004, I felt like I had a big enough following and people were starting to make money on the internet that I decided to leave Roto World and start my own thing, which was called TalentedMrRoto.com, which was my nickname online, the Talented Mr. Roto. And what happened there is this is before Shark Tank, before I had no idea about venture capital money or raising, and so and this is, by the way, this is also before Wix.com or where you could grab a website off the shelf. So I put $10,000 of my own money together, hired a developer to build TalentedMrRoto.com, found a couple of professional writer friends that I knew were good fantasy analysts, that played, and so I said, hey man, why don't we do this? And because I had no money to do any paid marketing, what I said that the only way I'm going to be able to market this is me. So I went to every website, TV station, radio station I could find saying, I will come on your air for free. I will write for you for free. Just link back to my website. Just mention my website. Again, this is also pre-social media. This is before even MySpace, let alone, Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. So that was the only way to really get the word out. And so I did that for 3 years. And of course, if you're looking to get the word out, where do you go? ESPN. there was a guy named Steve Mason, who's still there, ESPN Radio in LA, 710, and him and his partner, John Island, they were fans of mine. So they put me on the show, and I just started doing stuff for ESPN. And, radio led to me doing some stuff on Cold Pizza, which is the precursor to First Take. I know you're talking to Stephen A. later. And, I started doing that, and I started doing some ESPN News stuff, and then I started writing for ESPN, the magazine. And then in 2007, ESPN came to me, and they said, hey, you know what? We think fantasy football is big enough now that we want a guy. We've been talking internally. We need to find our Mel Kiper of fantasy football. And at that point, my website was profitable. No one was buying islands, but we were in the black. We had a lot of subscribers. We'd won a bunch of awards. We were doing well. And so they said, we'd like to buy your website, move you to Connecticut, and make you the guy. And so I did that. So that was my first exit. And it was a 2-year deal. It was a 2-year earn-out. I was like, all right, well, I'll be on TV for 2 years, and we'll figure it out. And then I ended up doing 15 years at ESPN before ultimately leaving for NBC 2 years ago. So that's kind of that story, which is, it was an amazing ride. Still is. I'm still on an amazing ride. It's crazy.
So since that first exit, you've watched a bunch of your old colleagues, content creators, build followings on established platforms like ESPN before going out and launching their own media empires and experiencing much larger exits. Bill Simmons and Dan Le Batard, Pat McAfee, Clay Travis are amongst them. What's allowed that to happen over the last decade? How do you go from like the small exit that you're talking about with Mr. Roto World to...
How do you know it was a small exit?
Well, you qualified it as that.
By the way, it was a small exit.
Okay.
Listen, I think it's a long answer. What I would say is, in those specific cases, I think what's happened is that first off, the advent of social media has allowed content creators to own their own megaphone, right? Before, as I just talked about in my story, when I was launching, the only way I could get any users was using somebody else's platform. I had to go on ESPN Radio or ESPN, and I spent 2 years at the NBA and writing for NBA.com. I did a blog for MLB.com for 3 years, using their traffic and, hey, I did it for free. Link back to my website and develop a following there. But in essence, I had to go to other people's audiences. And then now, thanks to Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and Discord and YouTube and everything. There's so many places to build your own audience that you can do that. And so whether it's Simmons or Le Batard or McAfee actually did it in reverse, right? He just I know he was with Barstool, but but the fact of the matter is they were all able to get big brand recognition. And the reason you read Bill Simmons wasn't because he was on ESPN.com or Grantland. You read Bill Simmons because he's a really good writer and you enjoyed his takes on sports. And so what happened is those people were able to say, hey, I have a large movable audience. And so if I'm not going to be compensated for that audience by whatever corporate entity they were at, then they're like, let me go, do something else. And so there's a lot more examples than what you gave, but yeah, there's different models there, right? I think what Peyton Manning is doing with Omaha is really super interesting, right? I think on a smaller scale, like Ariel Helwani, who left ESPN, and is sort of piecing it together, doing a lot of different as an individual creator. And so in the UFC world, and so that's the idea is I think what's allowed it to happen is that there's become so many more channels that the big boys aren't as big anymore. And also just, again, there's so many ways for you to get your message out that you don't necessarily need somebody else's platform.
The opportunity for sports betting sponsorship, affiliate has pumped a whole bunch of more money into the space too.
That's the key, right? Honestly, that's also every single one of those people that you mentioned, with the possible exception of Simmons, all got a significant amount of revenue from sports betting. McAfee got on the map because of the FanDuel deal, right? And and by the way, both sides seem really happy with that. Le Batard with the DraftKings deal. Simmons had a FanDuel deal as well with the Ringer. The Ringer had a FanDuel deal. Now he also had this big podcast network. He was ahead of the curve on podcasting, but and so Clay Travis has I believe a FanDuel deal, right? And so just have to go through all the Mannings have Caesars, right? So it's, yeah. Yes.
Did the success of those guys and watching them build these monstrous businesses kind of have any influence on you taking another run at startup?
100%. So I mean, like I've been very blessed in my career in that the people that are into fantasy sports, that are into me, that I've developed I've been doing it for a long time, so I've developed a large following, and I've luckily gotten a lot more right than I've gotten wrong, and so people have stayed with me, and I've shown, like, at various stages there were things that I did that made me think, like, oh, okay, this audience is with me. Like they put my column behind a paywall at ESPN, which I was annoyed about personally, because you want your audience, you work in front of the most people, but from ESPN's point of view, I got it because ESPN Plus was a huge company, priority still is for them. But then I became the columnist that drove the most subs to ESPN Plus, and I was just like, oh, that's good to know that people are willing to pay for my work and they're willing to follow me. And so seeing the success of guys like Bill Simmons, of Dan Le Batard, of people going out on their own, it just sort of made me think about Colin Cowherd's another one, right? And he's a friend, and seeing what he's doing with the volume. And so seeing those kind of journeys, if you will, gave me, I think there was an opportunity, given sort of my stature and my audience and knowing what fantasy and sports betting, what that audience is. And so all those other companies they advertise sports betting, you know what I mean? But the content isn't geared towards help me win, which has been the hallmark of my career. And so I thought there was a real opportunity there. I wrote a book called Fantasy Life a while ago. It debuted at number 5 on the New York Times bestseller list, spent many months on the list, did really well for me. And so based on the success of Fantasy Life, I thought there was something more I could do with that brand. And so, it seemed like the opportunity was right.
So what is Fantasy Life?
Fantasy Life is, thank you for that easy question. For that setup. Fantasy Life is a sports betting and fantasy sports media and content company. We have a small gaming piece as well. But ultimately what we do is we produce content. We produce content for our owned and operated platforms, and we also produce content for media partners. And so we derive revenue from a couple of different streams. We obviously advertising supported, and we kind of put that into 4 buckets, right? So there's sponsorship. We've worked with Buffalo Wild Wings and Bud Light and WebEx by Cisco and Paramount Plus and Hugo Boss and on and on and on, and KFC and Hulu, and so a lot of big brands that we've worked with over the years. We do sports betting affiliate as well, so we have partnerships with BetMGM and DraftKings and Underdog and all the usual suspects. We do cost per click, and where we get paid to put links into our newsletter, which we'll talk about in a second, and then of course just programmatic. So we do all of our content is free on FantasyLife.com. We did 2 million uniques a month last year on the website as well. We have a bunch of free tools as well that help you win both sports bets and fantasy football. And then we also produce content and then our other platform, we have a newsletter we have a daily newsletter that goes out. Over 400,000 people get it, 60% open rate, 7% click-through rate. So we're really excited about the success of the newsletter. It continues to grow. And we won a bunch of awards for it. And then we also produce content for media companies. So we have we do a 5-day-a-week show for SiriusXM, a national radio show for them. We do we launched the Fantasy Life Fast Channel with LG on their LG TVs, and so we have the 3rd highest rated sports channel of all their fast channels. The NFL is number 1, NCAA is number 2, and then we're 3rd according to LG. And so and we've got some other deals in the works there as well. So we produce games for Facebook, believe it or not. That we produced 2 games this past year that combined 1 million people played. So it's gone really well.
Your readers and subscribers come to you because they're perceiving the platform to help them better understand the data-backed expertise in sports betting and DFS, right? That's very different than a lot of the entertainment-focused content that exists in the sports betting space. One has to assume at some point that the average sports bettor gets tired of losing money. So do you feel like you're better positioned because of what you do, the type of content you put out, than some of the other content in the space?
We're really proud of our content. I don't want to comment on anyone else's content. It's all matters of taste. I'll just say we're really proud of our content. We've been very conscientious about who we hire as content creators under my name, under that brand, because the majority of my content still lives at NBC Sports, right? And it's Football Night in America, it's Peacock, it's NBCSports.com, it's rotoworld.com. But one of the reasons I went to NBC Sports is because they were willing to be supportive of my entrepreneurial side, and they were like, "We'll let you do what you want to do with Fantasy Life." So I contribute some content, but the majority of the people we've hired are very well respected in the sports betting space or in the fantasy football space. We have not gone for a certain type of content creator. We've gone very specifically try to be. We think we can be funny and analytical and fun and entertaining, but highly respected, and we're, the Fantasy Sports Gaming Association Awards literally like 2 weeks ago, for the second year in a row, we won Best Content, Best Written Content, and Best Audio Show, which is those are awards that are voted on by our colleagues and candidly our competitors. So we were really flattered that basically the people we were competing with said, "We think you guys are the best." So, I've obviously made my career in content, and so, I have a big say in who we hire, obviously, and so really proud of the guys, men and women, that we have.
Where's the ball going? Meaning, are you expecting that bettors become sharper in the years ahead? How do you?
I don't know. Probably not. I mean, I think there'll be a little bit more, but a little bit more sharp. But right now, what you're seeing is like people don't line shop, and they love same game parlays. And I'm like, it's interesting. For the last 2 years on Football Night in America, I have to do a same game parlay. I've done it for 2 different partners over the last 2 years, and that's one of the segments I do. Is I put together, and I put it together, and I'm trying to win.
Yeah.
Right. But the feedback we get is like, literally, the higher the odds. If you can put together a parlay that's like plus 800 or plus 1200, that will produce more people will bet it than if it's plus 300 or plus 250. And you're like, don't they understand that the reason it's plus 1200 is because it's really unlikely to hit, And I want to hit the bets, I want to hit the bets for, the people watching. And, what we hear is that literally the public they'd rather $10 that turns into $250, even if, they've got a very slim chance of that happening. I don't know. I think it's going to be a while before before America's filled with sharps. It's going to be a while.
We talked about that this morning, about the ability to throw a few bucks and had the long shot in the conversation on degeneracy. That seems to be a common trend here across.
I think we are a country that loves the jackpot, for lack of a better, right? Like whether it's the mom winning the crazy Hawaiian vacation on Price is Right, at the end, or lottery, we're still obsessed with the lottery of the person that bought $1 scratch off and now they're a billionaire, and so yes, there is that appeal where it's just like, I could put $5 on this crazy parlay, but if it hits, I'm going to be rich, and so I think you see that, and it's one of the things that I think is the big appeal of DFS, when you've seen, DraftKings, for example, when they have their Millionaire Maker every weekend. Literally, in theory, you can put down $20 on one lineup Sunday morning, and by the end of Monday Night Football, you're a millionaire. And so, regardless of how unlikely that might be, that dream, I think, people enjoy that chase, having that potential opportunity.
So people like that chase for now. I guess the question should be, should the networks that are putting out, and I'm not suggesting your network and what you're doing, because there's a lot of people that are just putting out kind of entertainment-focused content that is offering picks that are not doing the homework and such.
Yeah.
So just in general, I'm just speaking, should media companies that are putting out picks and in a lot of cases probably losing, be concerned that casual bettors eventually will turn on them?
I think yes, but I think it's less about the networks, and I think it's more about again, I'm a talent, so I think about it from the individual talent, but saying to an ex-athlete, and a lot of networks do this, a lot of shows do this, saying hey, by the way, you like A.J. Brown over. Okay, you know what I mean? Hey, ex-athlete, our, fill-in sponsor blank, the line is, over under 87.5 receiving yards for A.J. Brown. I'm taking the over. He's A.J. Brown. and he hasn't done the work to know that AJ's missed practice 2 days and he's against the shutdown corner, and like the Eagles are favored by 2 touchdowns and they'll probably be running a lot in the second half, and like he hasn't hit this number in 5 weeks, and like all the different analysis that goes into it. Like he's just being handed a stat by some researcher. So I think that's what happens, is that somebody says like, oh, ex-NFL player, you played the game, you must be smart. I'm going to go bet the over on A.J. Brown because former NFL wide receiver said so, and then it doesn't hit. And you're like, you know what I mean? That's why, and I take that, like, I'll just speak back to me for a second. That's why it takes me all weekend to come up with the parlay that I'm going to put out in front of 15 million people on Football Night in America, because the lines are constantly moving, and I'm like, it's a pain in the ass. It's great. It's a great job, but it's not something that I'm just sort of like.
You're not taking it lightly.
I do not take it lightly. It's probably the thing I spend the most time on over the course of the week, in all seriousness.
You mentioned the newsletter. I think, I'm not sure that the people out here understand. I certainly do, because the newsletter serves as kind of the center of my flywheel. But explain why the newsletter is an important piece of your business.
Well, you know what? So Austin Reef is Austin Reef was the co-founder and CEO of Morning Brew, which is one of the most successful newsletters in any space. He's a friend of mine. He's on our advisory board as well. And so we talk about this, but it's basically, we're in an attention economy, right? I mean, there's 8 million ads. There's, your phone's constantly blowing up. We're in an attention economy. And so the newsletter is one of these simple things that you have to actively subscribe to. You subscribe, you have signed up to get it. And in terms of our newsletter, it's written in a very fun, informative style. It's easy to read. It's like, hey, everything you need to know about fantasy football and sports betting in a 5-minute read. Yep. And so we deliver on that promise, and it's free, and we're in your inbox every single morning. And we've done studies in terms of the best time to send and open rates and everything like that. And we churn the list constantly. But that's why, is because you've captured that user, as opposed to just, if I send out I have 1.1 million followers on Twitter, and I send out a tweet, and I'm lucky if 20% of my audience sees that tweet,
sure.
Right? And so you think about anything, same thing, there'll be people, I'm in front of, for the last 2 years, I've been on Football Night in America, which is the #1 television show in all of network television. The only thing that's higher rated than that is the actual Sunday Night Football game. So I've been in front of 15 million people, football fans, for 2 straight years. And I will still have people come up to me and say, hey man, I love you on ESPN. I'll be like,
I've worked at ESPN in years.
But my point is,
I got it.
So my point is it's one of those things. It's like, if you're not watching when I'm on, and so the idea of being in somebody's inbox and that you've actively subscribed to that is why it's such a big part. It drives, we have seen when we put a link into our newsletter, whether it's to drive one of our products or one of our partners' products, everything like that, we have between a 7 and 9% click-through rate, which, if you know anything, I know you know about newsletters, but for those who don't, industry standard is usually 1 to 2%. Yeah. 1 to 2%. So the fact that we're anywhere between 7 and 9 during the football season is astronomical. And so it's how we've been able to build our business, is literally starting with that newsletter, is because we know we've got that audience.
We've just got a couple more minutes, so I just want to get through a couple last questions here.
Rapid fire.
Yeah, well, not rapid fire yet, but you started your career with baseball. We pivoted to football largely because of the demand, right?
Sure.
But as we think about starting to expand the pie here, is there opportunity in some of the other sports, meaning so much attention in the fantasy world is spent to football? Is there more opportunity for these operators to grow with basketball, hockey, whatever?
Sure. I mean, anywhere where there's less competition, there's opportunity to grow. And obviously the most competition is in football, because it's the biggest sport by far. But I'll tell you that we have talked about, just from our company, we've done the analysis, and we have, so eventually we'll get to other sports, but we think we can make more money by doing more product offerings around fantasy football than we can starting a baseball newsletter, starting a basketball newsletter, building tools for we offer free bets, and we have some tools on fantasylife.com around basketball and baseball. But we, for the most part, we've spent our resources and our time building out more revenue streams and more areas of the business around football for both sports betting and fantasy than we have other sports, because it's it's just such a massive audience.
Just last question, because we only have 15 seconds, but if you had to give some advice to a young content creator who had an entrepreneurial spirit like yourself, does the medium matter? Do they need to go work for an established entity first? How do you get started?
Just get good. Whatever you want to do, get good. Like I would say, like, whatever it is you want to do. If you want to be a writer, just start writing. You want to be a podcaster, start podcasting. You want to be somebody on video, just every day, hold up your phone and do a 1-minute broadcast and get used to just talking to yourself, which is a weird thing, right? But like, it doesn't matter. Like, Bill Simmons made his money off of podcasting, right? Mr. Beast is a billionaire because of YouTube. Like you pick a platform and I can say that person is, done very successful because of that one platform. Twitter's been my best platform, right? But so I wouldn't worry about when people ask me for advice, like how do I get famous? How do I do this? How do I build this? I'm like, just get good. I promise you, if you are good at what you do, an audience will find you. And if an audience finds you, the ESPN, NBCs, CBSs, of the world will find you. The DraftKings of the world will find you. Or the YouTubes or the Substacks or what, you know what I mean? Like just get good. Don't worry. All that other stuff will take care of itself.
Appreciate all the time and the insight.
You bet.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, Corey.